Angry and grieving, Lebanon still waits for answers and justice. One of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history unleashed a mushroom cloud of destruction over an already crippled city. 12 months later, anger is growing as no one is held accountable. Have politicians obstructed justice, and how can the fractured country ever fully heal? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the Beirut blast 1 year on. On August 4th, 2020, at 6:07 p.m., nearly 3,000 tons of volatile ammonium nitrate exploded at Beirut's seaport. It further plunged a country already mired in political turmoil and nearing economic ruin even deeper into crisis. An unnamed statue, built by artist Hayat Nazar, now stands at the epicenter of that blast. It's made up of broken glass, twisted metal, and debris, as well as the personal belongings of people traumatized by the explosion. She symbolizes both the destruction of that day and the opportunity to rise above it. But a year on, political inertia has left little hope for any improvement or closure. Now, a report by Human Rights Watch accuses senior Lebanese officials of criminal negligence, saying they knew the risks involved in storing explosive material at Beirut's port, but did nothing to stop it. And that those same officials are now trying to derail attempts to hold those responsible to account. The explosion that ripped through the city caused a tremor across the entire country that was heard as far away as Cyprus, more than 200 kilometers off the coast. The blast killed 218 people and injured 6,500. It forced the evacuation of 300,000 from their homes and left parts of the city completely destroyed. Lebanon's ruling class, long considered corrupt, has shielded itself by refusing to lift the immunity of officials summoned for questioning in a judicial investigation. Lebanon's latest prime minister designate is the third in the last year who's tried and failed to form a government. The Lebanese pound has lost 90% of its value, and power outages can last 20 hours a day. Compounding that is the pandemic, which has left the city's overburdened hospitals and social services stretched beyond capacity. In Beirut, anti-government protests have filled the streets, but is there any hope a mobilized public can actually bring lasting change when so many attempts before have failed? So 1 year on, let's look at what evidence has been uncovered. And joining me now from Beirut is Lama Fakih. She is the Crisis and Conflict Director at Human Rights Watch and was part of the organization's investigation into the Beirut port explosion. Lama, thanks so much for being with us. You know, to say this is frustrating is an absolute understatement, especially hearing Lebanon's leaders promise to get to the bottom of this, to promise accountability, then to watch them actually obstruct investigations. How duplicitous are they?
I mean, what we've seen in the 1 year since the blast is that there is not a commitment from the most senior leaders to ensure that there is accountability for the atrocious violations that took place on August 4th last year. Instead of facing up to the facts, we've seen that they've tried to stand behind immunities to protect themselves and to deprive people of the truth and of justice.
Right. You know, the victims' families are, of course, demanding that immunity for public officials be lifted. Do you expect that to happen? And how much would that alone pave the way for full responsibility to actually be determined?
We cannot give up the fight. You know, we have to keep insisting that immunities be lifted, but it is certainly an uphill battle. But
Right.
what is clear and what has been clear from our investigation, you know, after looking at over 100 official documents, after interviewing senior government officials, security officials, judicial officials, the facts are there, the evidence is there, the culpability is there. It's time for accountability.
Okay, so what should happen to those you believe might be responsible and those who've actually obstructed justice? What would be appropriate now?
So the domestic investigation has been fraught. So we are really looking to the international community to step in. We have been calling for a Human Rights Council investigation, a fact-finding mission. It could be a 1 year fact-finding mission to look into the causes of the blast and who is culpable. We are also calling on states that have human rights and corruption sanctions regimes to use those tools to go after those officials that are responsible for ongoing human rights violations related to the August 4 blast. If we are just going to rely on domestic officials, we can be sure that they are going to persist in trying to uphold this culture of impunity, which has for too long dominated in Lebanon.
Okay. You're calling as well, for targeted sanctions.
That's right.
How exactly would those work? Who exactly do you want targeted?
So for those senior officials that are still in positions of power, that are responsible for ongoing violations, so people that are continuing to undermine the right to an effective remedy.
Like who?
It's for each government to assess the facts and to make a determination based on their assessment. But what I can tell you is that these types of asset freezes, these types of travel bans, they will have an impact on the way that officials act in Lebanon. And it could have a positive impact on a willingness to engage in a legitimate judicial process. So if another country is going to come after you for interfering with the course of justice in Lebanon, then it might change a political calculation. And we are really calling on other governments to do what they can to try to push and promote for accountability in Lebanon, because without it, we will not be able to rebuild or to move forward. We will have no guarantees that this type of atrocious event will not happen again.
The excuses lawmakers are using, they include that they're being used as scapegoats, that accusations are politically motivated. How do you get around that?
There will be a judicial process. A judge has been appointed, an investigation will be undertaken. If they have doubts about the due process or fair trials happening within the domestic system, then that is a problem for other people that are being prosecuted as well. They cannot just shield themselves from accountability while allowing other people to be prosecuted. What's really happening here is that they're happy for lower level officials to be the scapegoats for this. But the truth is the responsibility goes much higher.
Lama, can you give us any sort of timeline here?
A timeline in terms of what happened on August the 4th?
When we might actually see real accountability?
The judicial investigation that was set up began in early August of last year. And so far we have seen that some charges have been made, some individuals have been detained, many individuals remain in pretrial detention. The investigative judge has said that we can expect movement in the investigation before the end of the year. At the same time, the judge is not able to move forward with this process as he would like. He has requested that immunities be lifted, and Parliament and other bodies have yet to do that. So it's not at all clear that it remains in the judge's hands.
Okay. Lama, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on the Newsmakers. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
As mentioned earlier, several Lebanese officials have promised accountability. President Michel Aoun says people are owed the truth about what happened and have the right to see justice served.
The quest for truth and full justice is still the claim of every Lebanese and a self-evident right, especially for those who were inflicted loss at heart, the parents of the victims who fell on that fateful day. I have already committed before the Lebanese to serve justice and hold accountable everyone whose involvement is proven by the investigation. Today, I restate my pledge that no one is above the law, no matter how high they may rank. Let justice go all the way in probe and trials till facts are revealed and till the desired justice is served.
Well, people aren't just demanding justice for the blast, they're also demanding a solution to the country's deep financial and political crises. Lebanon has been without a functioning government for almost a year. So to discuss that further, I'm joined by George Saoud. He's in Beirut. He's a political activist and supporter of President Aoun's Free Patriotic movement. From San Antonio, Texas, is investigative journalist and founder of the news website BeirutReport.com, Habib Battah. And in Athens is Sami Halabi, the director of policy at the Beirut-based think tank Triangle. Thanks all so much for being with us. George, I'm going to start with you. We just heard President Aoun saying, promising actually, justice and truth and that no one is above the law. But here he sits with immunity, as do his ministers and others in the government. They can't have it both ways, can they?
First of all, thank you for having me. Let me start. That's a very interesting question, especially with what recently happened and in regards to the immunities that you just asked about. We all know that the President of the Republic is protected by the Constitution in terms of sitting into investigations. Although on top of that, the President himself requested from the judiciary investigator to listen to him and take his statement in regards to the August 4th blast. I believe that the President of the Republic led by example in terms of being clear conscience in terms of his role or his in the August 4th blast. He knows that he has nothing to hide. He came forward and asked the prosecutor to talk to him and to listen to his statements, regardless of whether the Constitution protects him or not. Furthermore, 48 hours ago, the leader of the Free Patriotic movement, Minister Basile, had a press conference, and he called upon the Speaker of the Parliament, President Berry, and asked him to call for the Parliament to come together and vote for pulling off the immunities for all ministers, Parliament members, and all legislators. So I believe with the power and that is given to us as Free Patriotic movement, as part of the Parliament, we are doing our part, and we are asking other parties to go down to that Parliament and lift the immunities on themselves and on others. If we want to bring justice, if we want to bring justice to the fallen,
Habib, do you believe that politicians will actually do what George is saying, and will immunity be lifted?
Well, I think we need to consider the context to understand Lebanon and this investigation. Lebanon has had many unsolved crimes over the past decade. There have been tens of assassinations. Almost no one has been held accountable for them. So I think there's a central structural problem in Lebanon where no party is really completely in charge of the country, and it's very hard to run a country that way. So we can make promises on one side and then blame the other side. And so I think, Lebanon is really in the middle of a strategic conflict. And the parties in Lebanon don't necessarily always seem very sovereign. We know that in this fragmented state of Lebanon, there is a lot of international interests that are pulling the sides apart. There's a tug of war over Lebanon because it's such a strategic interest. So, we don't really see, so there could be a lot of protection coming from not only within the country, but from outside the country. Lebanon is a great Cold War today between Iran and the U.S., and it's been that way for some time. So it's kind of hard for Lebanese to take the statements of their politicians seriously because they don't really know if they can, if they're really actually being sovereign. And also there's a lot of desire to protect allies in this country. The government is very much a nepotistic operation in Lebanon. We've seen the same faces in power for decades. So, most people will not be that confident about the investigation. It's had a lot of twists and turns over the past year. But it is a very difficult economic situation, and people are trying to hope, I guess, for some sort of stability at this point, if anything.
I mean, Sami, where does that actually leave, the quest for justice here and the thousands and thousands of victims who are desperate for it? Because if these investigations in their preliminary stages are being obstructed, and when you think about what so many Lebanese people actually suspect is really behind this explosion, it's not just about underestimating the risk or about incompetence and ignoring warnings. There are many suspicions that people were actually looking to profit from inside the government from those materials being dangerously stored there. If we can't even get the most basic investigation really completed, do you think there's a real chance that Lebanon will see closure on this investigation, will see real accountability? And if it doesn't, what will be the consequences there?
Well, I think I would like to just, build a little bit on what Habib is saying. I mean, there is a context in which this is happening, and is that Lebanon is not a democracy. Lebanon is a kleptocracy and a fragile state ruled by a sectarian junta. And this is a legacy of our civil war. The system created at the end of that war, which ended in 1990, split up the pie. And that pie has been, or that cow, for lack of a better metaphor, has been milked by essentially people who are war criminals. I mean, the president fled after the end of the Civil War. The Speaker of the Parliament remains in his post since the end of the Civil War. I mean, these are men who committed war crimes. These are men who bombed civilian areas, ran war economies, traded in drugs and arms. And they took off their fatigues, brandished suits, and then said they're going to come run the country. And they blame each other. They diffuse any responsibility. And anytime there's a crisis, they just point fingers. And in this specific case, we are dealing with a culture of impunity, which we have not been able to shed. And in answer to your question, I really don't believe that there is a lot that is going to come of these investigations, whether immunity is lifted or not. It is too little, too late for the international community to come in and say we are thinking of imposing sanctions on these people. That is one thing. The other thing that we need to consider is, for most Lebanese, the shock and that, frankly, the PTSD that they have experienced or continue to experience in their everyday lives as a result of this blast is not the first thing on their minds. What's on their minds is the fact that they are now poor, that the economic situation has gone from bad to destitute in a couple of years. Imagine that you are running a business, trying to build a future for your family, and within 2 years you are robbed of your savings. Your home is destroyed. You have no basic services, and you are poor and destitute. This is the situation right now, and so in lieu of all that, I don't really see that there's much hope for the investigation. What we need to look forward to is a rearrangement of the political structure and system, and the only hope for that, really in a non-violent form, is the elections next year.
Yeah, the elections coming up in May. George, let me ask you about those. I mean, we have been asking for so long, what is actually there to, fill the political void? So many have rejected what they're calling the old guard. We keep hearing, Lebanese that want a younger, newer generation to take over, or some kind of, technocratic administration. But where and when will they be found, and will it happen in time for the elections that are supposed to happen in May of 2022?
First of all, we cannot be putting a bet on democracy while we don't respect its results. Regardless what we think about these traditional political parties in Lebanon, these parties are elected by the Lebanese people. Whether the 17 October revolution comes up with a new set of parliament members that can do a change, I do not know. I do not believe they are capable of doing so. The word technocrat, when you put the word technocrat as a word that is opposed to the political parties, I don't see that's a rational way of describing things. You can have people who belong to the traditional political parties who are technical in their ministries that they occupy. I believe now it's very important to get that government formed with the president, the designated president Mikati.
But George, can I just help me understand? Are you basically saying that the Lebanese will have more or less the same choices again come May?
To a certain extent, I believe yes. The traditional parties will reform themselves into power. I don't believe. I believe that the October 17 movement had a really good chance in making change. It allowed other parties to stray away from its original cause. Unfortunately, every free Lebanese, had a bet on October 17 movement. It went to a totally different place.
Okay.
Right now we see that October 17 movement itself empowered other traditional parties that are facing President Aoun and the Free Patriotic movement led by Minister Basil.
Okay.
We are in a bottleneck.
We only have a few minutes left. I
just need to wrap up with this. We are in a bottleneck where we need to form a government.
Okay, understood. We understand that. But Habib Battah, seeing how governments haven't... Yeah, seeing that governments haven't been able to be formed and the political failures continue, will it be good enough, do you think, for the Lebanese people to face the election in 10 months' time with basically the same options they have now?
I mean, you can't build a new political system from scratch. I mean, we can't, these parties have had a lot of time to, create election machines to, like all over the world. I mean, you can't win elections without money and power. The people who win elections are not the victims, they are the victors. And this is true all over the world. So it's kind of not really rational, I think, to expect some massive change in the country, especially as I've been saying, the country is not really in the hands of the country. You have an arms race in Lebanon today. The United States is pouring billions of dollars of arms into the Lebanese army. You have Iran pouring billions of dollars into Hezbollah. The international community should ask itself, does it want to see a independent or sovereign Lebanon? It seems that Lebanon is basically a chessboard to settle proxy conflicts. So, there are many multiple levels here to consider, and it won't be solved in any quick amount of time.
Right. Sami, quickly, I mean, we've been hearing victims say, get it sorted or fear our anger. Do you think politicians really do have to be in fear of something?
I mean, look, the elections are a first step. The establishment parties will try as much as they can to obstruct a free and fair elections. And if they're not able to, they'll probably try to delay those elections. But they are not a fait accompli. At the end of the day, there is a political cultural change that is happening amongst the younger generations of Lebanon. Those are the ones that are driving this new thought process around what a new Lebanon could be. I mean, a party like the Free Patriotic Movement, like Hezbollah, like the Future Movement, these are essentially sectarian parties led by the leaders of a junta. I mean, we should think about the Lebanese establishment as a junta. And that is now what is happening with the international community as they're moving towards sanctions. We're becoming a pariah state as we are failing. And the only way to get out of this is to regain some legitimacy by reestablishing the democratic process and moving forward. But I fear, to be honest with you, that this is a generational process. We are not getting out of this crisis of confidence in the banking sector or in the political sphere anytime soon. And we need to buckle down. There will be a place for democracy. There will be a place for accountability. But at the moment, I think that what the Lebanese really need is a moment of reckoning to finally understand that they will not be able to solve this the old way, and we need to chart a new course to a better future.
Okay, Sami, I will have to give you the last word. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this segment of Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, and thanks, of course, to our viewers as well. We'll leave you now with images of Lebanon's capital.
I don't know. It's just something changed, and it's like a state that we can never go back to. I guess that's. I'm not sure if I would say it lost its soul, because I still think it has a lot of soul, but it's a wounded soul, I guess.